Hi guys, Stephen Kamada. So this is my very first instructional video in at least a very long time. So but my purpose here is to really try to make a whole like little library of different guitar related subjects to kind of help in the learning process, be it for my existing students, and anybody. Um, so we're going to talk about a lot of different topics from the simple to complex and beyond. But today, I kind of want to start with the simple things. The first thing I really want to talk about is how you learn, because the reason I want to talk about that is, first of all, not a lot of people do. Second of all, the other reason is it's one of the things that I've noticed that could potentially really benefit or really hold somebody back in their whole development process. And in terms of like what works, what versus what doesn't work, we're not going to talk so much about what doesn't work, although I might mention it in passing. The main thing I do want to talk about though is what does work. So, a couple things. Uh, One thing that always works when it comes to learning guitar is mental flexibility. So, in other words, try to keep an open mind. Try and look at things from as many different angles as possible. Like you do not want to be rigid or fixated on one particular point of view, because 9 times out of 10, when you're trying to learn something that maybe is a little bit more challenging, at least for what you feel at the time, usually it's kind of a question of looking at something from a different angle, and then that's kind of like there's the secret to figuring that thing out. So that's one thing that really helps in the whole learning process. Um, Second of all, always try to form your own conclusions, from everything that you're learning. If you just try and take everything at face value, um, that might mean you could regurgitate the information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you get it or that you could even use it. Let's be honest, who wants to learn anything that they can't use? So, so this is kind of a very personalized, individual thing that the student has to think about, which is, okay, here's the information that I'm given. Now, how do I process it? What do I do with it? And the best thing I would say to that end is, first of all, always know that there's a simple way to look at things. Always an easy way to look at things. Try and usually it's the most direct way. So try to always condense things down without stripping out like the really important parts. Um, we can get into certain examples on that, but I think I'll save that for later. Um, so that's one thing is just like absolutely try to break things down, form your own conclusions. That's a very big thing. So the last little point I have to make about the whole learning process, and this is the part that is somewhat delicate. Um, it's basically like, what do you do when you go home and you're trying to learn a piece and let's say you make mistakes, or you just hit a wall for whatever reason. Um, I think the best place to start with that is that mistakes, there's two ways of looking at them. There's a point of view of fear, like where you're afraid to make the mistakes in general, which in my experience, both, again, as a student and as a teacher, usually that doesn't work very well. It works better when you take a more relaxed view towards your mistakes. Um, Meaning that, okay, when you make a mistake, yeah, that goes with the territory. You're learning something new. So of course you got to allow a certain window for you to make mistakes to you really grasp what's going on. If you don't allow for that window to even be there, it's you either are going to take a really long time to learn something, or you might not even learn it at all. So that's something really worth considering when it comes to the way you look at mistakes. Um, Second, within that is you have to look at yourself. Namely, try to think about your own psyche and your own habits. And so I'll give you an example. Like for myself, when I practice, I tend to get um, easily demoralized if I do things wrong. So what I usually try to do is I start with very simple goals where I can kind of up my morale little by little. Because let's be honest, every time you start practicing, your morale is basically a zero. So that means you have to do things to kind of raise your morale little bit by little bit until you get to the very top of where you feel you need to be at that day. Um, so that's a really important thing when it comes to practicing and managing your mistakes and all that sort of stuff. Um, Beyond that, when it comes to looking at the whole learning process and mistakes and all that stuff, there's also sort of the psychological element a little bit too. Um, and this kind of affects the way you learn. It also affects the way you perform too. Um, which is this: you have to learn to basically stay calm and not be stressed. Those are two things. Your heart is one thing. Like any emotion you feel, chances are is actually going to help you when you play, not hurt you. But your psyche is a little bit of a different thing. So when you're talking about any preoccupation with stress or anxiety, that's definitely not a good thing. You should always play with an empty head, no matter what. Like no preoccupations whatsoever. Um, so that's kind of the gist of it. Um, Now, the other thing I would just say when it comes to just the overall, practicing, arc of development is when it comes to forming, new habits. First of all, let's establish this one truth: you do not form bad habits overnight, and you do not form good ones overnight either. So it takes time. It really does. Um, and so once we establish the fact that it takes time, you have to be again a little bit lenient in terms of the way you approach learning new habits, learning new techniques, or correcting bad ones, or whatever. Um, so this we have to talk about what doesn't work. So what doesn't work is to be like really obsessive compulsive about every time you make the mistake. That actually isn't a good thing. Um, Although it's also not a good thing either if you just completely ignore or are completely oblivious to the mistake. That's definitely, kind of like on the opposite end of things. So what's the healthy way, one might ask? Well, it's kind of like this. You want to be mindful. So if you are trying to correct a bad habit, let's say you have one good run at it and then you have another not so good run at it. You don't need to beat yourself up over the not so good run. However, you should at least be aware of it, and maybe say to yourself, "Okay, I messed up there. I kind of I kind of regressed just for a moment, but I'll bet you if I try to do it a couple times right in a row, I'll feel a lot better." And usually that kind of leads to you actually like getting better and more consistent over time with your building of good habits. So anyway, that's pretty much it for the whole learning process. Now we want to talk about some actual things with regard to playing. And I think it's appropriate that as far as things that, with regards to playing, let's talk about the thing that most people tend to avoid, and that's posture. Posture is a very important thing. It's one of the things that most people, unless you're like classical players, tend to avoid, which is this. You will see here that the guitar neck is like at about a 45-degree angle. And that's actually a very good place for it to be in, because it just really makes things a lot easier when it comes to the left hand, and that affects everything from bar chords to stretching and the like. It affects everything. So having the guitar neck at that nice, very pivotal 45-degree angle is very important. Now, if you were to stand up and do this, say, like with an electric guitar, you would want to have it basically right around here, like the heart level. It might not look all that great, but it's certainly going to be a lot physically better, a lot more ergonomic to the way you're going to play. So that's basically it for my first video. Be on the lookout for a bunch of others, and I'll see you.